What happens when a trusted babysitter becomes dangerously obsessed with the father of the kid she's supposed to protect? A young woman's innocent crush spirals into lust, jealousy, and betrayal until one shocking secret is overheard that sets off a deadly confrontation no one saw coming. Stay tuned, because this is the true crime story of how a babysitter's obsession with a married man ended in brutal tragedy. The Johnson family was well respected in their neighborhood, admired for their stability and their warm presence in the community. Anthony Johnson, a hard-working father in his early 40s, carried himself with quiet confidence. His wife Denise, graceful and diligent, was the heart of their household. Together they had two young children, lively and full of energy, who were the center of their world. Life for them seemed ordinary on the surface, filled with Sunday mornings at church, family dinners, and the comfort of routine. It was into this home that a 20-year-old babysitter named Tasha Daniels was welcomed. Tasha was known around the neighborhood as dependable and cheerful, a young woman who seemed harmless, even sweet. Denise trusted her easily with the children, believing she had found the perfect helping hand. Tasha quickly became a familiar presence in the Johnsons' home, laughing with the kids, reading them bedtime stories, and sometimes lingering after her work was done, chatting politely with Anthony and Denise in the kitchen. At first, it all felt innocent, but beneath her bright smile was a girl carrying the weight of a broken past. Tasha had grown up in a house without structure, her father absent, her mother drifting from one toxic relationship to another. Chaos had been the rhythm of her childhood, leaving her craving the stability she never had. When she stepped into the Johnsons' home, with its warmth and order, she felt something different, something she had longed for. And when she saw the way Anthony moved about the house, steady, dependable, respected, she began to see in him the father figure she had never known, and, before long, something more. Her friend Darius Cole had known her since childhood. Darius had seen the brokenness she carried, and he worried about her. One evening, as they sat on the steps of his porch, Tasha confided in him about how much she admired Anthony. She laughed nervously, saying she thought about him too much, how he seemed perfect compared to the men she had known growing up. Darius frowned, shaking his head. "Tasha, he's a married man. That's not something you want to mess with. You'll only hurt yourself." She brushed off his warning with a smile, insisting it was harmless, that she was just talking. But the way her eyes lit up when she mentioned Anthony told him it was more than just words. Tasha began to spend more time at the Johnsons' home than her job required. She lingered after Denise returned, offering to help fold laundry or stay for dinner. She watched Anthony closely, noticing how he laughed with his children, how he spoke kindly to his wife, how he carried himself with quiet authority. The more she saw, the deeper her admiration grew. She began to imagine herself fitting into their life, not as the babysitter, but as something more. Denise began noticing small things. The way Tasha sat a little too comfortably on their sofa. The way her eyes seemed to linger on Anthony when she thought no one was looking. One evening, Denise mentioned it to her husband, her tone light but tinged with unease. Anthony chuckled, waving it off. "She's young, probably just looks up to me. Don't worry about it." Denise wanted to believe him, but something inside her whispered that it was not so simple. Tasha, meanwhile, had begun making subtle changes. She started dressing differently when she came to babysit. Nothing obvious, but enough to feel noticed. She wore her hair in style she thought made her look older, more sophisticated. When Anthony complimented her once, casually, saying she looked nice, she carried that moment with her for days, replaying it in her mind. Darius saw the changes too. When she confided in him again, he grew more serious. "Tasha, this isn't harmless anymore. You're heading down a path you don't want. He has a wife. He has kids. You'll end up hurting them and yourself." She grew defensive, accusing him of not understanding how she felt. "You don't see how different he is, Darius. He respects me. He cares." Darius sighed heavily, knowing she was too far caught up in her fantasy to hear him. Life in the Johnson home went on as usual, but under the surface, tension was beginning to simmer. Denise smiled politely at Tasha, but her heart tightened when she saw how often the girls' laughter filled her living room. Anthony continued to brush off his wife's unease, confident that nothing was happening. And Tasha, with every passing day, fell deeper into a world of make-believe where she convinced herself that she was meant for more than just babysitting. For her, Anthony was no longer just her employer. He was the answer to the emptiness she had carried all her life, and in her mind, no one, not even his wife, was going to stand in the way of what she believed she deserved. Tasha's presence in the Johnson home became more frequent as the weeks turned into months. She offered to help Denise with errands that had nothing to do with babysitting. If Denise needed groceries, Tasha was there. If the laundry piled up, she volunteered to fold it while humming softly in the living room. Sometimes she even cooked small meals for the children before Denise returned, presenting it as a way to lighten her load. The children adored her, which only made Denise feel conflicted. On one hand, she appreciated the extra help, but on the other, she couldn't ignore how Tasha always seemed to position herself closer to Anthony, her eyes flickering toward him even during simple conversations. Denise noticed how Tasha laughed a little too loud at Anthony's jokes, how her gaze lingered when he walked into the room, how she offered to help with tasks that didn't involve the children at all. It was subtle but unsettling. Anthony, busy with work and church responsibilities, hardly noticed. He assumed Denise's concerns came from overthinking. "You're reading too much into it," he reassured her one night as they prepared for bed, his voice casual, as if the matter was trivial. Denise sighed, not wanting to press further, but a quiet voice in her heart warned her otherwise. Tasha, meanwhile, was no longer satisfied with just being in the home. She wanted more of Anthony's attention. She began wearing subtle perfume, the kind that lingered even after she had left. Her clothes became more stylish, though never inappropriate enough to raise immediate alarm. She watched for the smallest reactions, how Anthony glanced up when she walked in, how his smile widened when she greeted the children, how he thanked her when she stayed late. In her mind, each moment was a sign, a confirmation that he noticed her too. Anthony complimented her once, casually saying, "Nice dress." She carried that memory with her like a treasure, replaying it in her head and interpreting it as proof of something deeper. She began looking for ways to create more moments like that, lingering in the kitchen while Anthony prepared coffee, laughing at stories she barely understood just to keep him talking, standing close enough that he could smell her perfume. Darius, however, saw through it all. One evening they met at their usual spot on the corner store steps. He leaned back against the wall, arms crossed, watching her talk about Anthony with glowing eyes. "Tasha," he said firmly, "this thing you're doing, it's not love. It's a fantasy. He's a grown man with a wife and kids. You're going to ruin yourself if you keep pushing this." She rolled her eyes, brushing him off. "You don't understand, Darius. He treats me with respect. He listens to me. He's nothing like the men I grew up around. You didn't see the way he looked at me last time." Darius shook his head, frustration in his voice. "You're imagining it. He's just being polite. That's who he is." But Tasha wasn't convinced. In her mind, Anthony was different, and the more Darius tried to warn her, the more determined she became to prove him wrong. She began inserting herself into the Johnsons' routines. If Denise mentioned being tired, Tasha was quick to volunteer to stay longer. She started buying small gifts for the kids, showing up unannounced with their favorite snacks. She helped Anthony carry groceries inside when he returned from errands, and she lingered to chat about his day as if she were his partner and not just an employee. Denise noticed her efforts and grew uneasy. She spoke to Anthony again, her tone sharper this time. "She's doing too much, Anthony. It's not normal for her to be here this often." But Anthony only sighed, insisting it was harmless. "She's just helping. Don't be so hard on her." The tension between husband and wife grew, while Tasha convinced herself she was slowly becoming indispensable. She imagined scenarios in which Denise grew tired and stepped aside, leaving her in the role she longed for. Late at night, she lay awake, picturing the children calling her mommy, picturing herself walking into church on Anthony's arm, picturing Denise gone from the picture altogether. The images grew stronger each day, and with every smile from Anthony, every word of gratitude, she believed she was one step closer to making that life real. The shift in Tasha's behavior became impossible to ignore. What had once been subtle admiration was now a bold pursuit. She leaned too close when she spoke to Anthony, laughed too freely at his words, and looked at him with eyes that left no doubt about what she felt. Denise noticed every detail, her chest tightening whenever Tasha entered the room. She confronted her husband one evening, her voice sharper than before. "Anthony, she's not just here for the kids anymore. She's here for you." Anthony frowned, rubbing his temples. Denise, you're seeing things that aren't there. She's young, maybe a little attached, but I would never cross that line. You've got to trust me. Denise wanted to believe him, but her instincts screamed otherwise. She watched the way Tasha lingered, the way her gaze softened whenever Anthony spoke, and she knew this was more than just a crush. Anthony's dismissal only made her feel more alone in her worry. Tasha, on the other hand, saw things very differently. Every time Anthony smiled at her, every polite word he offered, she twisted it into proof that he felt the same way. She replayed their briefest exchanges in her mind, building them into stories of secret longing. When he once brushed past her in the kitchen, she held on to the moment for days, convinced it was more than an accident. She told herself that he was holding back only because of his wife, and that one day he would choose her instead. Darius noticed how far gone she was becoming. One evening, he caught her sitting on the swings in the park, lost in thought, her eyes clouded with daydreams. "You've got to stop, Tasha," he said firmly, sitting beside her. "You're building a life in your head that doesn't exist. He's not leaving his wife. He's not yours." Tasha snapped, her voice sharp, her face tight with anger. "You don't know that. You don't know what he feels. He's different with me." Darius shook his head, disappointment heavy in his eyes. "No, he's not different. You just want him to be. And it's going to end badly if you keep pushing." But Tasha refused to listen. She pulled away from him, crossing her arms like a child unwilling to hear reason. "You don't understand, Darius. You've never been loved like this. You don't know what it feels like to finally have someone see you." Her words cut him, but not for the reason she thought. He did understand. He understood that she was chasing something that would never be hers, and he feared where it would lead. She started watching the family's social media, scrolling through pictures of their vacations and birthdays, her jealousy growing sharper with every smiling image of Anthony and Denise together. Each photograph felt like a knife. She imagined herself in those pictures, replacing Denise's smile with her own, imagining the children clinging to her instead of their mother. At night, she would lie awake, picturing a future where Anthony was hers completely, where the wife was out of the picture and she stood proudly by his side. She began fantasizing not just about being with Anthony, but about replacing Denise entirely. When she looked in the mirror, she no longer saw herself as the babysitter. She saw a woman destined to take over another woman's life. Denise finally decided to confront Tasha directly. One evening when Tasha lingered too long in the kitchen after dinner, Denise cornered her, her tone deceptively calm but her eyes blazing. "You've been overstepping. You need to remember your place here. You're the babysitter, nothing more." Tasha smiled sweetly, tilting her head, her voice dripping with innocence. "I don't know what you mean, Mrs. Johnson. I love the kids, and I only want to help." But her eyes told a different story, defiant and unyielding. It was a silent challenge, and Denise felt it pierce straight through her. When Anthony walked in moments later, Tasha quickly switched her tone to playful chatter, talking to the children, her act flawless. Denise clenched her fists, helpless as her husband dismissed the matter once again. That night, Denise lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying every look, every smile, every warning bell she had ignored. She felt isolated, as though she were fighting a battle her husband refused to acknowledge, as though the walls of her own home were closing in on her. Meanwhile, Tasha's obsession escalated. She found excuses to text Anthony about the children, lingering conversations that veered into personal topics. She asked about his day, his dreams, his struggles, questions that went far beyond her role. Anthony tried to keep his responses brief, professional, but the very act of answering fed her belief that she was special to him. She began saving his messages, reading them over and over, twisting every word into hidden affection. Her world was no longer the reality around her, but the fantasy she built inside her mind, a fantasy where she was no longer the outsider, but the chosen one. Then came the moment that shattered Denise completely, a moment that confirmed her darkest fears. Denise's fears turned into reality one late afternoon when she came home earlier than expected. She walked in quietly, setting her purse on the counter, and that was when she heard it, Tasha's voice, low and trembling, coming from the living room. Denise froze, straining to hear. "Anthony, I'm pregnant," Tasha whispered, her voice breaking. The silence that followed was heavier than anything Denise had ever felt. She stepped closer, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear. Anthony's voice came next, shocked and uneasy. "Tasha, you can't. You shouldn't be saying that here." Denise's hand flew to her mouth as she realized what she was hearing. The betrayal slammed into her chest like a physical blow. The babysitter she had allowed into her home, the girl she had trusted with her children, was carrying her husband's child. She stumbled back, her vision blurring with tears and rage. She wanted to burst into the room that very second, but she held herself still, listening as Anthony tried to calm the girl down. "We'll talk about this later, but you can't just come in here and say things like that. You don't understand what you're doing," he said, his voice hushed and tense. But Tasha's reply was bold, almost triumphant. "I do understand. You love me. You've always loved me. Now you can't deny it anymore." Denise felt the ground beneath her shift. Her worst suspicions hadn't just been true, they were far worse than she had imagined. She turned and rushed out of the house before either of them could see her, her tears burning hot against her cheeks. That night, Denise confronted Anthony in their bedroom. She slammed the door and spun to face him, her voice trembling with fury. "How could you do this to me? How could you bring that girl into our home and betray me like this?" Anthony tried to explain, stammering, insisting that it hadn't meant what Denise thought, that it wasn't what she believed. But his excuses were like gasoline on fire. Denise screamed at him, years of trust crumbling in a single evening. She thought of her children, of the stability she had built, of the humiliation she now faced. She warned him coldly that if he didn't end it, she would. Tasha, meanwhile, misread everything. She believed the pregnancy had finally bound Anthony to her forever. In her mind, Denise's place was already erased. She began showing up at the Johnson home more often, sometimes without being asked. She carried herself with new confidence, smiling at Anthony as though she were already his wife. The neighbors began to whisper, noticing how the babysitter's presence seemed to overshadow Denise. Even the children seemed confused, caught between their mother's cold silence and the babysitter's overly cheerful affection. Darius saw the danger growing closer with every passing day. He cornered Tasha outside the corner store one evening, his tone desperate. "You have to stop this before it destroys you. You think this baby will make him yours? It won't. You're going to lose everything." But Tasha was stubborn, her eyes glowing with misplaced certainty. "You don't get it, Darius. He needs me now. She'll be out of the picture soon enough." Darius grabbed her arm, his voice low and heavy. "You're walking into a storm that's going to swallow you whole." But Tasha pulled away, determined, blind to the disaster looming ahead. Denise, no longer able to contain her fury, decided to confront them both. She rehearsed her words, her anger sharpening with each passing night. She couldn't look at Anthony without seeing betrayal, couldn't hear Tasha's name without feeling sick. Her mind replayed the whispered words she had overheard, the tone of triumph in the girl's voice. One Sunday morning, as Anthony prepared to leave for church, Denise's resolve hardened. She told herself that this was the day she would put an end to it all. In the hours that followed, her anger turned into something darker, something that pulsed with every heartbeat. She envisioned the confrontation, the look on Tasha's face when she realized the game was over. She pictured Anthony caught between them, his lies unraveling in front of everyone. By the time she walked into the church, her mind was no longer clouded by confusion, but sharpened into a dangerous clarity. The choir sang, the congregation clapped, and Anthony stood at the pulpit preaching about forgiveness and family. Denise sat in the pew, her eyes burning into him, her hands trembling as she clenched her purse. Tasha was there too, sitting smugly at the back, her hand brushing over her stomach as though reminding everyone of the secret she carried. Denise saw it, and her fury ignited into a fire she could no longer control. The sanctuary, filled with hymns and praise, was about to become the stage for the darkest truth no one had expected. The congregation swayed with the music, voices rising in harmony as the choir filled the sanctuary with song. Anthony stood tall at the pulpit, Bible in hand, his words booming with passion as he preached about unity, about faith, about family. His voice carried a conviction that made the congregation nod and clap, but Denise heard none of it. She sat rigid in her pew, her heart pounding violently against her ribs, her eyes locked on the man she had once trusted with her whole being. She looked at him not as her husband, but as a betrayer, a hypocrite standing before God and the people, daring to speak of loyalty while hiding a secret that had broken her world. Her hands trembled as she reached into her purse, her fingers brushing against the cold steel she had hidden there. Behind her, Tasha sat with an almost smug expression, her hand brushing her stomach, a small gesture that made Denise's blood boil. The sight of her sitting so boldly in the very church Denise had helped build with Anthony was too much. Denise's mind raced with every moment that had led to this Sunday morning. The whispers, the late-night arguments, the smug smile of the girl who had invaded her home, and the weakness of the man who had allowed it. The hymns faded, the congregation bowed their heads in prayer, and Denise rose slowly from her seat. Her footsteps echoed softly on the polished floor as she walked down the aisle, her eyes never leaving Anthony. Some in the congregation looked up, curious, but most kept praying, unaware that the peace of their worship was about to shatter. Anthony looked up from the pulpit just as Denise reached the front, and for the first time in years, he saw something in her eyes that terrified him. It was not anger alone, but a storm of betrayal and finality. She pulled the gun from her purse in one swift motion, gasps erupting from the pews as the congregation leapt to their feet in horror. Tasha's scream pierced the air, but Denise's focus never wavered. She leveled the weapon at Anthony, her voice breaking as she shouted, "You betrayed me. You ruined everything we built." Anthony raised his hands, his voice shaking as he tried to calm her, but his words were drowned by the weight of her fury. Without hesitation, Denise pulled the trigger, the deafening crack echoing through the sanctuary. Anthony stumbled backward, clutching his chest, his face frozen in shock as he fell to the floor. Chaos erupted. The congregation screamed, some ducking under pews, others rushing for the doors. But Denise was not finished. Her eyes darted to Tasha, who sat frozen in terror at the back of the church. The young babysitter who had once walked into her home as a helper was now the rival carrying her husband's child. Denise's face twisted with rage as she turned the gun toward her, her voice a mix of anguish and venom. "This is your doing. You destroyed my home." Tasha raised her hands, sobbing, her voice trembling as she begged for mercy, but Denise's fury was unstoppable. The gun roared again, and Tasha crumpled to the floor as screams filled the air. The sanctuary, once filled with songs of praise, was now a scene of horror and bloodshed. The congregation fled in panic, children crying, women shrieking, men shouting for someone to call the police. Denise stood in the center of it all, her chest heaving, the gun trembling in her hand as she looked down at the destruction she had unleashed. For a moment, silence seemed to swallow the chaos. She stared at Anthony's lifeless body sprawled near the pulpit and at Tasha's still form at the back of the sanctuary. Her face softened for just an instant, as if she realized the weight of what she had done, but then her jaw tightened and her shoulders squared. She dropped the gun onto the floor, the clatter echoing in the vast room, and she raised her hands as police officers burst through the church doors, weapons drawn, shouting commands. She did not resist. She simply stood there, broken yet defiant, as if daring the world to judge her. The news spread quickly, shocking the community that had once admired the Johnson family. Whispers filled every street corner, every store, every pew of the church. How could such a tragedy unfold in a place meant for love and worship? How could a young woman's obsession lead to such destruction? In the courtroom weeks later, Denise sat silently as witnesses recounted the events of that Sunday morning. Darius was among them, his voice heavy with grief as he described how he had tried to warn Tasha, how he had begged her to walk away before it was too late. Tears filled his eyes as he admitted that she had been blind to reason, lost in a fantasy she believed was real. The jury listened, the judge listened, and in the end, the verdict came swiftly. Denise was sentenced, her actions condemned, but the story left scars on everyone who had been there. The congregation never forgot the Sunday morning when faith was interrupted by fury. Families never forgot the echo of those gunshots in a house of worship. And the community never forgot the babysitter whose obsession spiraled into betrayal and the wife whose pain exploded into violence. This story is a chilling reminder of how secrets, lies, and unchecked desires can destroy lives in the blink of an eye. What began as a trusted relationship between a family and a babysitter ended in bloodshed and loss, a tragedy that will forever haunt those who witnessed it. What do you think about this story? Could anything have stopped Tasha's obsession before it was too late? Could Denise have walked away instead of letting rage consume her? We want to hear your thoughts. Leave your opinions in the comments below, subscribe to the channel for more dramatized true crime stories, and tell us where you're watching from.